Michael stepped on the criminal path a long time ago, and one way or another, his entire life involved committing petty offenses. Most of the time it was petty theft with a small group of other individuals who had also gone astray, just like him. Stealing a purse or a car stereo was something all too common for Michael. At the same time, the man never crossed the very line that separates the petty thief from the hardened criminal. Michael's father, Bill White, was a stern and uncompromising man. From Michael's early age, his father infringed on him in every possible way and deprived him of all the benefits that a child should have at such a young age. This was partially due to the fact that after the death of his wife, Bill brought a new woman into the house who became his son's stepmother. It's not that Rebecca was mean to her stepson. The problem was that she was completely indifferent to him and basically didn't take any part in raising the boy. Rebecca didn't care if her stepson attended school or if he did his homework. And after Rebecca and Bill had a daughter together, the parents' attention for the next few years was directed only at her. Meanwhile, Michael knew virtually nothing about his own mother. From his father's sparse stories, it appeared that Sarah White died when Michael was 3 years old. Michael remembered next to nothing from that time. The image of his mother was very blurry in his mind, devoid of any characteristic details. There were no photographs of Sarah in the house, and Michael's father was extremely reluctant to talk about his past. Instead, he cherished his new wife and devoted all his free time to raising his daughter. Due to his indifference and coldness, Michael didn't even finish school and started running away from home when he was just a teenager. The teen wandered the streets of the city with a gang of other troubled youth just like him. For the most part, they were students from an orphanage and children of dysfunctional parents. Time flew by, and by the time he came of age, Michael had stopped living with his father altogether. Unfortunately, this option suited Bill and Rebecca quite well, as they felt that they now had one less problem in their life. Meanwhile, Michael continued to stay in random places, surviving on odd jobs or petty theft, thus getting barely enough money to afford buying food. Even though the young man was no Robin Hood, he still couldn't offend a helpless old man or a child. One day, as he was hanging out by the supermarket entrance, Michael looked around the market with a trained eye. This store was his favorite place for theft. The cameras were positioned in a way that primarily aimed to prevent shoplifting. Meanwhile, ensuring the safety of personal belongings of the shoppers was clearly not part of their goal. That day, Michael noticed a woman's purse, which the careless customer left on the table next to the security post. The guard wasn't there. He was probably either making a round of the market or smoking in the back room. It's now or never. I won't have that opportunity again. The woman is well dressed, which means that there should be something valuable in her purse, Michael thought, and took a few cautious steps forward. Looking around, the young man quickly grabbed the purse from the table and, covering it with his shirt, slowly walked away towards the exit. Michael's heart was beating wildly from the rush of adrenaline. Subconsciously, he was ready for any development of events. If someone were to call out to Michael at that moment, he wouldn't hesitate to drop the purse and rush towards the nearest alley. It happened before, so the young man had a clear plan of action in his head for cases like that. But everything went well this time, and Michael left the supermarket unhindered. Lowering his head and pulling a baseball cap over his eyes, the young man hurried to the city park, where he intended to examine the contents of the purse, sitting under the canopy of a century-old oak. At that same time, Michael was 100% sure that this time he struck gold and provided himself with money for at least several days to come. Imagine the young thief's disappointment when all he found in the purse was $100 in change and a bunch of bank cards, which were nothing but pieces of plastic without the PIN code. Well, was this worth risking your freedom over? Michael said with disappointment in his voice. Suddenly, his fingers found another pocket inside the purse, and there was clearly something hidden there. He carefully pulled on the zipper and pulled out a photograph. Pictured on it was a young woman holding a little boy in her arms. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about this picture, but when the young thief took a closer look, he almost fainted from what he saw. "What is that? That's just impossible," the young man whispered in surprise. The fact was that the woman in the picture wasn't just holding a random little boy, but Michael himself, who at the time was no more than 3 years old. Michael could recognize his childhood photographs among thousands of others because he had studied them carefully earlier in his life. But where did this woman get my childhood picture? She couldn't have gotten it by some accident, the young man thought, and proceeded to study the contents of the purse more carefully. Going through the bank cards in his hands, Michael found a crumbled receipt, most likely issued to the owner of this purse. Among other things, it had a phone number that could be used to contact this woman. Michael's first thought was to throw out the purse and try to forget about this strange incident. But then, curiosity took over him, and he decided to find out how this stranger got his childhood photo. But in order to do it, Michael had to call the number from the receipt. Using a payphone, the young man introduced himself under a fictitious name and told the woman that he had found her purse. The stranger at the other end of the line was very happy about this news and immediately gave Michael her address. The house of the purse's owner was located outside the city, and Michael had a lot of trouble finding it. Michael had never been so agitated in his life. The young man felt that as soon as he would go inside, he'd immediately be surrounded by police officers. But the young man's fears were unfounded. He was greeted by an elderly woman with a hint of sadness on her pretty face. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I found your purse. Sorry, I couldn't resist and looked inside. Trust me, I didn't take a single cent," Michael said embarrassedly. "Oh, it's not like there's a lot of money there. About $100 and some overdraft credit cards. But I'm still very grateful to you. Would you like a cup of tea?" the woman offered cordially. At that moment, Michael suddenly felt a surge of inexplicable sympathy for this thin woman with sad gray eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I would love a cup of green tea. It's the best drink for this kind of weather," Michael responded. And only after sitting down at the kitchen table did the young man decide to ask the very question that brought him to the house of the purse's owner. "Excuse me, ma'am, where did you get this photo with the little boy? Is that you holding him? Did I get that right?" The owner of the house looked at Michael in surprise and then said something that instantly made his head spin. "Yes, that's me. You got that right. And that little boy is my son," the woman answered with a sad sigh. At that moment, Michael's mind went fuzzy. The young man felt like the whole world was crumbling before his eyes. Michael always believed that his mother had died a long time ago. But now it turned out that she was alive and living in the same city as him. Unable to control his emotions, Michael announced to the owner of the house that he was the boy from the picture. Hearing Michael's words, Sarah turned pale and, covering her eyes with her hands, began to cry softly. As it turned out a little later, it was all her ex-husband's fault. After their divorce, Bill White insisted that their son would stay with them. To make it happen, the family tyrant used his extensive connections and even gave an impressive bribe to all the right people. Moreover, Bill bought a house for Sarah and made her promise that she would never contact their son. Meanwhile, he came up with the story for Michael, telling the little boy that his mother had died of leukemia. Now, Sarah White had a new family, a beloved husband, and a beautiful daughter. Nevertheless, she couldn't stop thinking about her son, Michael. In memory of him, Sarah always carried his picture in her purse. She knew that Bill White was a very evil and cruel man who could ruin not only her life, but also the life of her new family. Therefore, keeping her promise, Sarah stayed at least a mile away from her ex-husband's house at all times. And now, after so many years, she found the son that she'd been thinking about all this time. Of course, Michael forgave his mother, knowing firsthand how bad his father's temper could get, since he'd always mistreated Michael too. Michael was so happy that he couldn't help but hug his mother and cry softly. These were the first tears in several years of his life on the street. Then the young man told his mother everything that had happened to him in all the time that she'd been absent from his life. Michael didn't fail to mention his criminal activities, which could end with him getting sentenced to time in the state country prison at any moment. "Forgive me, son. Forgive me for not finding you earlier and keeping the inhuman promise I made to your father," Sarah said with a sob. That day, they stayed up late, talking in the kitchen, and Michael got to meet his mother's new husband and daughter. To the young man's great joy, they turned out to be nice and pleasant people, and they both immediately started inviting him to move in with them. Tears welled up in Michael's eyes yet again. Through the fault of his own father, he wandered the streets for so many years. And now, finally, he had found a home where he would be loved and taken care of like every child deserves. Deciding to start a new life, Michael solemnly swore before his family that he would never break the law again, and having found a job, would become a respectable citizen of his city. Looking into her son's eyes shining with happiness, Sarah was sure that he would keep his promise and would certainly succeed in all areas of life.